And we're back in Inside the Ropes, and this week our guest, he is a man of many hats. He is a former promoter of MLW, he's a former creative team writer for the WWE, he did an apprenticeship with Gary Hart, and some might say even a close confidant to Stephanie McMahon. I don't know. But he is the one and only Mr. Court Bauer. Court, welcome to the show.
Hey Kenny, how you doing?
Good, thank you for agreeing to come on, and I don't know if our listeners might not know, but between you and I, there's like that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing going on, because like we do the We Want Lucha podcast with Master Republic, and then Master Republic work with Conan, and you work with Conan and MLW, so it's like a family reunion of people that have never met, so thank you for coming on.
That's how wrestling is. It's always like 6 degrees of something. I mean, it's amazing. If you did that, everyone somehow is connected. Wrestling's this big, huge universe across the world, but at the same time, it's a very small world, and so you're always like a phone call or email away from someone at any level of wrestling, whether it's the top level or, you know, down in Mexico or out in Japan. You're always just 1 or 2 people away from that contact. So it's weird how it works out, but that's what makes wrestling so special.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And I guess one of the things that everyone's talking about at the moment is the Jim Ross situation. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've spoken about it already on the with John Pollock for Live Out Wrestling. But Jim Ross has come out yesterday. I think it was yesterday in the MMA Hour show. Mm-hmm. And he sort of addressed him leaving, and he's saying that it is accurate that he has retired, and obviously there's maybe like 3% of wrestling fans that believe that.
Right.
What's your take on it now, after about a week to sort of digest it? Do you think that there is any chance that this was something that JR kind of wanted to leave? Because I know that I was at his UK tour.
Right.
And he was very much, you know, I love being a part of WWE, I love doing the talent development stuff. What do you make of it now, sort of a week ahead?
Yeah, I think Dave Meltzer has done a fantastic job of reporting on what's transpired with Jim Ross, and I've spoken actually in the last week or so to Jim, and he's in a great place. He's very positive, and you know, a guy that's had his struggles with health and other things, to be able just to say, you know, he's got his health and he's got a lot of time ahead of him. I think this is a nice little departure for him, in that, you know, he as a member of he was part of like developmental in terms of recruiting and scouting, and then, you know, doing PR and media for video releases pertaining to stuff like Mid-South. I mean, as you get up there, I mean, that's a lot of travel and stuff. So I think for him it's a nice break, and this guy's been busy, active, grinding it since the mid-'70s, since basically out of college. I mean, he's been a gainfully employed person because he is very talented and has just a great track record, so he's always been in high demand. So to have that ability just to not, you know, work on some outside venture right out, you know, he was always doing something, whether it's his barbecue business or his restaurants or being a part of WWE and trying to juggle all that stuff. This is like the first kind of just little quiet piece of time he's had in his schedule for forever. So I'm sure he's going to jump into something, and I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. But for, like, you know, a few weeks, it's nice to just be able to, what I used to call it when I left WWE, is go through this process of detox. And you detox from that demanding schedule, from being accountable to answering 1,000,001 emails of importance to insignificance, but they're always important and you got to respond right away, to just, you know, just have that time to just disconnect from the wrestling business, because it is a demanding business at that level. It's very exhausting, and, you know, this key, you know, how do you define someone that's successful in this business is longevity, and I think, you know, Jim Ross is obviously a very successful person. So in the end, I think it's just a nice little break, and where he goes tomorrow and the day after, who knows? I don't really, honestly, just my feelings, nothing, you know, I'm not giving any real inside analysis, but I really do believe that he won't pursue anything with TNA now. They could offer him a king's ransom, and he would really feel compelled to go there, and that's, you know, obviously his prerogative, but I don't think it's something that he's probably going to pursue, and I really don't know what the future of TNA is to even say that that's, you know, do you want to be a part of something at this point? Is it salvageable, or do you want to be that last guy that went in there and the ship was sinking and then you just went down with it? I mean, is that a great legacy, or do you go out with the legacy he has at WWE? Talent relations and being the guy that recruited The Rock, Steve Austin, Mankind, Triple H, and just recruited Brock Lesnar from the NCAA championship tournament when he was with University of Minnesota. I mean, just like look at all the guys he brought in, including Randy Orton, Shelton Benjamin. I mean, the list of who's who. It's amazing, and you see a huge drop off when he left that position in 2005, and John Laurinaitis took over, and you saw really just kind of a spell of. Kind of like a lull, basically. You didn't see a lot of vibrant talent being introduced for several years until Triple H took over the reins. So you can really see just this guy's impact and influence across the board. I mean, he is a key contributor to why the WWF rebounded in the Monday Night Wars, and that's not something that's really ever been highlighted. But if you look at it, without The Rock, without Steve Austin, without Mankind, without Triple H, without all this talent, and I'm not even scraping the surface, really, but without all those guys, what did WWF had? They didn't have a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, and I think Jim Ross is someone who his contributions are. I think Paul Heyman had done an interview with Bleacher Report, and he'd said, it's to think of him as just an announcer is doing him a disservice. To think of him as just a talent guy because he's kind of done so much.
Oh yes, I mean, and then just in terms of money, in terms of budgeting, people forget this is the only guy in almost 2 decades that could figure out how to do the formula for the budget for house shows, for international tours, for pay-per-views, the payoffs and everything, and who do we need to keep this cost-effective, and who do we need at the TV tapings and pay-per-views, and who can we leave off, and how many guys do we have in developmental? He was still doing that during the days of John Laurinaitis because Johnny couldn't figure it out to save his life. So, I mean, this guy is a bottom line bean counter too, which, I mean, it's one thing to be an announcer, it's one thing to have a good eye for talent, but then to be able to do the math and figure out that stuff out, obviously there's only a few people in wrestling that can do that. And so, I mean, he's just a real dynamic individual that when you plug into any system is going to make it a better system. And it's undeniable.
Yeah, definitely. And one other thing that I was going to ask you about this past weekend, obviously it was Night of Champions and Monday Night Raw, but last night when I was watching Raw, the segment with Dusty Rhodes and Stephanie McMahon and The Shield and The Big Show, I kind of thought of you when I was watching this segment because you got to work with Dusty Rhodes and you got to work with Stephanie. Right. What do you think of this whole angle of sort of bringing the Rhodes family into it and Stephanie, I guess, being portrayed more as a heel rather than trying to be nice, because the babyface thing seemed to be sort of dying when she was trying to do that a few weeks ago.
I think the key with her is being truthful in how she performs, but also being disingenuous, which Stephanie can do rather well in reality. So just that touch of smugness, not going over the top. The problem I have is watching the show last night. It was, you going back and forth between Virgil and Dusty Rhodes and Runnels and Rhodes, and it just, to me, that you're playing to such a small margin of the audience when you do that. When you look at anything in terms of the insider business of show business and stuff, it's not like you call Tom Cruise by his real name, which isn't Tom Cruise. You always call him Tom Cruise because that's what everyone identifies him as. And I just think that we're really shooting here, Virgil. It's just a disconnect. And I think wrestling in general is you're in a fantasy land, and once you get immersed in it, whatever rules you play by work. But then when you say, oh no, wait, there's something going on behind the scenes, and you play with that too much, it's not as provocative and fascinating as it was in '98 because it's kind of been done to death. And now I just feel like it's just, I don't know how much of this audience knew who Dusty Rhodes is when you watch the show. I mean, he's 67 years old. I don't know when he would last performed for WWE on a regular basis or of notoriety. So you have to wonder, it's like, if you're calling now 2 different names, it's hard because there are a lot of kids in that audience that weren't even born when WCW went under, and they're watching this. And so do they even understand Dusty? I mean, now you're calling him 2 different names, and it's just very confusing, I think. Not that you want to dumb down a product, but I just think that there's sometimes way too much of that stuff.
Even though you went to WWE in 2005, you were backstage at WrestleMania 20.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was it's funny because I was there at WrestleMania 20. I wasn't backstage, obviously, but I remember being there, and the show itself, from a fan's perspective, was quite a different sort of show because it seemed like they were kind of going in a different direction with sort of smaller guys like Benoit and Guerrero. And I'd heard before that you talked about some interesting things that you'd witnessed at the after party. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk through that experience of going to WrestleMania 20 and sort of, I guess, networking there, and what that was like.
Well, it was more of just a, kind of seen but not be heard kind of thing. I think a lot of people go into those situations, and like if you see Total Divas, you see guys that aren't signed with the company make fools of themselves and stuff. So for me, it really was just observe and be cool, be mellow and everything, and then hopefully you find the right person to link up with, and kind of maybe you impress them and they kind of open that door for you. And so for me, it really was just making the best impression I could without trying to be noticed. If I happen to have a conversation with someone, make it a positive and don't overreach. Don't ask them for a favor. Just leave them with a good impression and just go on with your life. Don't look desperate for a job, but just I felt like a sponge. I was absorbing the culture, the scene, the climate of the room, how people interacted, what was the etiquette, did everyone shake hands, was it more of a casual thing, how did they dress, what was the gist of conversation, was it more business or social, and how did the McMahons observe the room. Reading the McMahons to me was always key for success in the business, because if you can read Vince McMahon, you know when you can pitch him on an idea and when not to pitch him, and when is an appropriate time to really cash in those chips and give him that big push to introduce a talent or do a crazy match, or that real big match you think is money that maybe any other day he's not going to say, okay, let's try it, but that day you have him, you have his attention, you have him interested because maybe there's a bunch of injuries, he's just frustrated with the product, and he's ready to shake things up. I've seen people that haven't been able to read him that are brilliant, and they just can't understand why this guy's so difficult. It's just you just have to pick and choose and know that Vince McMahon, like anyone, has his good days and his bad days, and there's days that people want to be told and compelled to do something. Other days there's people just want to say, fuck you, I don't want to hear what you have to say. and I think that's just human nature, but with Vince, you just think you're in front of the all-powerful and all-knowing Oz, and whenever you say something, he's going to either grant it or say no, and then you're going to act accordingly. Well, no, he's just like anyone else. I mean, yes, he's very different than everyone else, but at the same time, he isn't.
One of the programs that I think you might have been there for was when Hulk Hogan came back and worked the program with Shawn Michaels.
Yes.
And it's a fascinating program to think about, because Michaels came out the night after SummerSlam and cut the promo on Hogan. Mm-hmm. Hogan said publicly that to him the program was going to go a different way and that Shawn went into business for himself. But what do you remember about that program working for the company at the time?
WrestleMania, I believe, was when Hulk Hogan came out and did the thing with Daivari. I remember a few things. I remember we started the Hogan and Shawn thing at the Garden, I believe, with I think it was like Shawn defeated Hassan, and then they did some deal where I think they double teamed after the match. It was like maybe like Hassan and Daivari beating up Michaels. Hulk comes out to make the save, and you start this like little thing. So this was in the works since WrestleMania when it was decided, and that's about when I started with the company. And so Hogan and Shawn team up. They do a whole thing. I think they teamed up at Backlash in 2005 as a tag team. And then they did this thing in L.A. where it was like this. And I remember working with Hogan. It was like Shawn Michaels, Hogan, who was the mystery partner, and it was just I think it was Cena, Shawn, and Hogan, and Hogan was the mystery partner in Anaheim. And I worked with Hogan that whole time, that whole taping, and he was. I think they worked like I want to say like Tomko, Christian, and Jericho. That was some. Like they needed that trio to take on those guys. But anyway, those were the dark days. And so that's when Shawn screwed him. I think he did the super kick there, I think he was either there or soon thereafter he did the super kick. And I might be remembering that point wrong. But they did the match. And I think I've told a story before where Vince really, at first he was being playful with Shawn because Shawn would attend all the agent and production meetings before TV. They happen earlier in the day, and would always nudge him like, well, you're going to be looking at the lights at the end of SummerSlam. We can go over the finish later, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And, Shawn at first was like, oh, yeah, I'll be looking at the lights. Got to get my sunglasses and all that stuff. And it was like, okay, Shawn's taking it pretty cool. And I had heard the stories from the Samoans and many others that worked with Shawn in the WWF in the 90s and the holy hell he was, and you're a top act. You actually, there's a lot of ways you conduct yourself, and some of that's how you're wired to be successful. But obviously, Shawn was a different man now, and he had seemed reformed in his attitude and his ways, and wasn't that heinous of a guy. But as the summer went on in 2005, Vince would continue to prod him and poke at him and have fun with him, and Shawn started taking it really seriously. And so Vince, seeing this, he's like a shark to blood. He's gonna just stir it up some more, and then go in for the kill. And they continued to go at Shawn and saying, yeah, I don't think Hulk's gonna really budge on this match, Shawn. And after a while, it became a very real thing. And I think Vince kind of made something that wasn't an issue into an issue, and Shawn became very temperamental about it. And Hulk when he was around, it was almost like he didn't show up. And he just showed up, taped his stuff, and if he did a match, that was it. But it wasn't like he was in Vince's office knocking on the door and politicking him. It wasn't like he was calling Stanford. There was no waves from the Hogan camp coming in. It was just Shawn that was creating this, because Vince had kind of been the puppet master, as he is. And maybe he felt that would motivate Shawn. But in the end, it just created a weird reality where Shawn was pissed at Hogan and felt this guy was uncooperative, and then had that really unprofessional match at SummerSlam, which I really think people should check out, because to me it shows you, a great performer is a guy like Ric Flair that had to lay down for 1,000,001 guys, or like The Rock. If you look at The Rock's win-loss record, if this was a shoot, it wouldn't be very impressive, and he wouldn't be Hall of Fame material. But he stayed over because he was super good at what he did, and didn't matter. And same with Flair, and same with so many other guys. And I believe that would have been the case with Shawn if he had put on a great match and had made Hogan look as good as he had made so many other people in the past, but instead he made it into this cartoon match where he looked like a fish flopping around out of water, and I think it was a disservice to the company. It was a disservice to his own future and his own bank account, because they were going to go and do a trio or a trilogy over the next few months, and that didn't happen. And the reality is, fans paid whatever it was at the time, $50 to watch the show, and I think they were expecting something a bit more appealing, or maybe it was just went over their head and they just thought it was a good, fun match, and that was it. But for me, it's like you're screwing the fans too in this, and just because you care about a loss, I mean, come on, you were going to get it back. And there's been so many flips on the story, like Hogan at the 11th hour, made Vince go into this room and da-da-da. No, there wasn't any of that. Vince had allowed Hulk Hogan to have creative control in his contract when he brought him back. And so that's not Hogan's fault. Shawn should have been pissed at Vince for allowing that. But it's always easier to be mad at the town, and as a manipulator, as a promoter, that's your job. That's a tool, is manipulation. So it is what it is, but I also think Vince screwed himself because he didn't get his trilogy, and I think that could have made business really strong for Vince going into the fall, and instead Hogan then tried to pitch Austin Hogan, which he did go into business for himself. I think it was at the Raw Homecoming in 2005, and that was not a great move, and that is when there was some static with him in the office, and he kind of more or less would not be involved with the company except for one run, I believe, with Orton the following year, or was it 2 years later? I'm a little fuzzy on that, but that it's too bad. And there's a lot of people, the people in the business, the young people today, and I'm 35, I'm acting like I'm 75, but when you grow up and you're a fan of the business, and a lot of those people are involved in the business today, they grew up watching Shawn Michaels, and they see him as this fan, they see him as a fan, and they see him as this superstar, and it's an aspirational experience for them, or inspirational if you're in there, and they don't know the guy as just the guy, a lot of them, so they don't look at it the same way as someone that might have been in there and seen it for what it was. So I think that he gets a pass on this, but the reality is that if you talk to a lot of people that were in there with him in the 90s, a lot of them, and I know a lot of them will tell you, he only would, if this was one of his friends, he would have made him look like $1 million, but because it wasn't, and the issue being what it was, he was not going to do anything. And it's really one of the rare blemishes on Shawn's really prolific career. I mean, he had a fantastic career, but it's just one of those things that the old Shawn reared his head for one night, and I guess, it's just one night. But what could have been a great trilogy to me, because not that Hogan's is wonderkind of in the ring talent, but I just think there could have been so much you could have done, and who knows? I always felt this with Hulk Hogan as one of those guys that he should have been the Babe Ruth of WWE and its mythology, and it's like iconic hero, because as a baseball fan and as a Yankees fan here in the States, we have Babe Ruth, we have Mickey Mantle, we have Joe DiMaggio, and these Lou Gehrig, and all these guys that really it's just like it makes the Yankee experience just more. It makes it bigger. It makes it more, the mythology more impressive when you have someone that you can tie to it and you can market them. And the WWE doesn't have that ability, and nor do they want it necessarily. And I think that makes the WWE's foundation and their mythology a little bit less than it should be. But I do think eventually Hogan does end up in the mix, and you just never know what's going to happen with TNA. I mean, it could happen tomorrow.
One of the storylines that you worked on when you were in WWE that you've said before that you weren't a fan of was using Eddie Guerrero's death in the storylines.
As you can probably pick up, there's wrestling in WWE. There's so many different factions and people against other people and fighting on creative or about finishes like Shawn and Hogan. But this is one of those times where there was solidarity and everyone was on the same page, and like, this is a bad thing. This doesn't feel good. It doesn't taste good. It doesn't look good. It doesn't represent the company and what it should be and what it could be. This is bad. This is bad for business. This is bad at a personal level. This is bad. And it was expressed to Vince. And the more it was expressed to Vince, the more entrenched he became with his vision for this. And as brilliant and as prolific as Vince McMahon can be, he can also be, just like everyone else, he can whiff. And he whiffed big on this one. And it was warped because he was able to convince people like Chavo that this is what Eddie would have wanted. And when you'd go and see them rehearse stuff, and Vince was very hands-on with rehearsals, I'm sure Eddie's just going to say, that's huge heat, man. And he'd do all this stuff. And it was a form of manipulation. He was able to manipulate Chavo into believing this is what Eddie wanted. He was able to manipulate others into believing that this is what Eddie would want. Eddie was all about business. And some people, I think it was because it was convenient for them to believe that this is what Eddie wanted. In reality, we don't know. And from those very close to Eddie for very, very long, they would disagree with that, including Conan, who I talk to all the time about that issue. And it was, Ray was just, I think for some of them too, they were in such shock at a human level, at a personal level, that they had lost their best friend, their family member, a confidant, a mentor, that they were kind of shell-shocked, and Vince, being a fatherly figure, could manipulate that, and he did. And that is what makes Vince Vince. So it was a very bad experience for me and for many people. There was a darkness over every meeting when it came up. But we aren't the decision makers. We are suggestors. We can help develop talent. We can help produce talent. We can help shape and form the programming, the company for the next 10 years. But we can't decide the paths to take. That goes and falls on one man. That's Vince McMahon. And he had this vision. He turned us all on mute and just went with his own vision until he exhausted himself eventually. But it was in the worst of taste. It was one of those things you look back on, and I think for WWE it's one of those things that maybe now, with hindsight being what it is, I don't think you'll see them ever really go back and revisit that chapter, because I think they realized, especially with Hunter and Stephanie, that this was not good stuff. This was bad. This was sleaze. This was some dark stuff.
Unfortunately, at this point in the call, we lost Court a little bit in the connection, but we're picking it right back up in the next question about why he left the WWE.
Then the Benoit thing happened in June of 2007, and that was one of those moments where I was like, wow, maybe I should, really, it's time to shit or get off the pot on the UFC proposition. And at that time, coincidentally, my grandmother was dying of cancer, so I was going up to visit her to say goodbye. So I went up to the hospital to say goodbye to her, and I was getting calls in the elevator from Stephanie's assistant saying, well, we need you back here for a damage control meeting concerning the Benoit family tragedy. I said, I'm creative. I help suggest booking ideas. I produce TV. I do writing, but I'm not PR. I'm not going to talk to the media about Benoit. But I don't understand. And I said, and you knew I was going up here to say goodbye to my grandmother. She's dying. I don't have another chance. This is it. I said, if Stephanie, wants me back, she can call me herself. But otherwise, I'm saying goodbye to my grandmother. And I never heard back from her. And that was the second time I had a death in the family. That they were really, Stephanie in particular, was very harsh towards me on, and the other one being my father. Actually, the night I worked with Hogan in Anaheim in 2005. So that's another story for another day. But I was like, at that point, I was like, this company, if they don't really appreciate to the point where they don't understand that you're going through something personally with someone dying in your family, and they're that warped that they think that my involvement in a damage control session is going to mean anything whatsoever, because we all knew that Vince was going to do whatever the fuck he pleased, for better or for worse, and he didn't do a great job, and he did all his damage control, and the WWE was worse for wear for it. So anyway, that happened, and as I get back to the office later that day, after saying goodbye to my grandmother, great to go back to work there under those circumstances with CNN and all these news trucks outside, and this horrible event that's occurred with the Benoit family tragedy, which it just shocked the system. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm just thinking, I think I'm done. I think this is it. And about, 2 weeks later, there was a line in the sand I drew, and I said, this is it. And Michael and I got into another fight. I quit. He said, you're fired. I said, well, then we both agree for the first time. I'm gone. And that was it. And I said, I left that office. I called Gary Hart before I called my wife, and I said, Gary, I'm a free man. He's like, Cord, I have not heard you this happy since you signed with the company. I said, I feel like I'm getting out of prison. I feel like this is Shawshank Redemption. I said, I just feel so liberated. I don't care what I do tomorrow. I don't care if I go into MMA, produce TV, or become a bum. But I'm just so happy with what I've done. I'm just so happy to be out of there. And I slept so well that night, and I hadn't slept well in a long time. And I regret not leaving probably when Greenie left, because we had such a great mojo and it was such a great thing, but I felt I could probably soldier through a little bit longer. And like JR will tell you, the 401k, the benefits is fantastic. So you sometimes look the other way on these things when maybe in hindsight you say, well, maybe I shouldn't have. But it was one of those things. It was just it was my time to move on, and I felt like that was a good ending to my career in wrestling. I felt like at 27 I had done everything I wanted to accomplish. Anything other than that would be a step down, and I didn't have an appetite for it at that point. I was done.
There's been rumours that have come out, I think Dave Meltzer mentioned it as well, that TNA are thinking about going back to the one location for their tapings. Do you think that's a good idea for them at this stage?
Depends on the location, and is it going to be the location for forever or just for a season? You change it up 4 times a year. What do you do? There's so many variables in the location. I doubt they can. It'd be very hard to get this location they used to have at Universal. Someone else has moved into that slot. If you go anywhere else in Orlando, you're competing with NXT, which you can't compete with. In terms of promotional muscle in the market, in terms of support from the community. I mean, WWE's locked Orlando up airtight now. So where else do you go? Do you go to New York? Yes, very impressive, easy to get a crowd any day, any week to shoot wrestling, but it's very expensive in New York. Every building, it's expensive. I promoted in New York with MLW, and woo-hoo-hoo. That was no cheap day at the office for me. That was a big check. That was a big check cut to the Hammerstein Ballroom. So where do you go? Do you go to Las Vegas and maybe cut a deal, and they're good at papering? Okay, but is there a community there to support it? I don't know. LA, iffy. Chicago's a great market, but every week, I don't know. So I mean, I think you can do it, but it's a very tricky proposition. They made Nashville work, so I guess you can do any market. I mean, they did Nashville for a very long time, but I think no matter what market you go into, it's going to experience fatigue at some point. Even if your product is amazing. So you just gotta. I don't know, man. I've also heard TNA's on the is on the block to be sold, so that the cars are at that point where they're considering it. According to, I think, Dave Meltzer said that. So.
Well, Cord, I'd like to thank you a lot for being so generous with your time and coming on the show. It's been a lot of fun to talk through some of your career. But now the MLW podcast a hit on the internet. So where can people find that? Where can people find you?
Sure.
Plug away whatever you would like.
You can find us at MLW.com or MajorLeagueWrestling.com or MLWRadio.com. We have a show out every Sunday night. It's free. It's usually an hour to 2 hours with Conan of Mexico and WCW and TNA fame, along with myself and our sidekick, Mr. St. Laurent, who was the roommate of Larry Zbyszko and is a booker on the independent scene in Florida. We talk about wrestling, sports, movies, our crazy journeys in wrestling and the wild stories that come along with them. Just go to MLW.com where you can find it. And we're on Twitter at MLW, and I'm at Court Bauer, COURT Bauer.
Well, Court, again, thank you so much for coming on the show and being so generous with your time. Everyone should check out MLW, and hopefully we can have you back again down the road and chat more.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kenny. It was a pleasure.